Well, just when you thought we couldn't undercut the Model 3, we, General Motors, led the EV transition. Yeah, but there was something else I was hoping your EV would be capable of, and that's DC fast charging at over 50 kilowatts. Yes, I know some people actually road trip sometimes, but we think road trips are kind of overrated. But we have the Equinox and the Blazer and many other great EVs on the Ultium platform that will support that. No, actually, I was gonna say, are you capable of building an EV that doesn't explode?
Shut up.
Yes, actually, we've ironed out the battery supply chain for the Chevy Bolt, so now it's much more stable, it's much more reliable, it will not blow up anymore. Oh, actually, that's great news. So you're gonna keep on scaling production then? No, we're losing too much money on it, so we're gonna cancel it. What EVs are you making now? The Hummer. Okay, alright, I'm done. I kind of tweeted about wanting GM to do this, but I didn't think they would do it so soon. Yeah, they've officially announced they're going to be ending production on the Chevy Bolt, both the EV and the bizarrely named EUV, which stood for Electric Utility Vehicle. GM, what was that? But yeah, it was announced on their earnings report that later this year they're basically going to close up shop for the Chevy Bolt so that they can convert that assembly line in that factory into more production for the Silverado EV as well as the GMC Sierra, which I think share a lot of components. One's just a bit more luxury focused than the other, which, yes, I'm sure there will be a ton of demand for those electric pickup trucks, but it still feels, in my opinion, a bit premature when you consider that 98% of all of the electric vehicles that GM delivered in 2022 were the Chevy Bolt. So yeah, that makes it pretty easy for the clickbait headlines to go wild about General Motors. It means they're canceling like 90% of their EV production so that, yeah, they can transition to a lot more high-end demand and probably more practical EVs, but at the same time, those Silverados and those Sierras are not going to be using the same battery packs. I'm honestly kind of confused why they need to transition the Chevy Bolt factory when there's probably nothing really shared between the Chevy Bolt and the Silverado. There's probably a bunch of things that they're gonna have to change out between the battery pack, the powertrain, the chassis, the wheels, the paint job. Practically nothing is getting carried over, which is why I'm confused why they have to stop Bolt production to increase electric pickup truck production. But the reason in previous tweets where I had mentioned that I was kind of hoping they would stop selling the Bolt or at least maybe update the Bolt is because as they were producing and selling more of those things, which were of tremendous value, I did positive videos on them in the past saying that the range for the money was great, especially coupled with the federal tax credit and everything, but the one big flaw that the Chevy Bolt had with it was the charging speed. It was capped out at 50 kilowatts, and as more people were taking delivery of them, that means that as Tesla opens up their network with the Magic Dock and everything, there was going to be a fairly large number of EVs on the road that were capped out at 50 kilowatts, which means they're going to be stuck at Electrify America or EVgo or superchargers, waiting long periods, creating longer lines because they take so long to charge up on road trips. And hopefully the ideal situation was that most Chevy Bolt owners were not DC fast charging anyway, so it wouldn't be that common of an occurrence to find at fast charging stations. But now knowing that production on them is basically going to stop in 2023 means that the people who bought the Chevy Bolts have them now, and there's not going to be much growth outside of that, of course, because there's no new ones coming out. Plus, I don't think the pouch battery cells they were using on the Chevy Bolts are going to age all that well anyway, especially with all of the negative stigma carried along with it being the EV known for blowing up and having disclaimers everywhere saying you can't park your Chevy Bolts inside this parking garage, or you have to stand a certain number of feet back from a Chevy Bolt because it could combust at any time. Yeah, that was like some of the most powerful anti-advertising we've ever seen for the EV world. And GM also holds the crown for most expensive recall of all time by recalling all of the old Chevy Bolts and replacing them with new battery packs, which is good for the consumer, but very hard on General Motors. I just had it in the back of my head like, wow, okay, they're canceling production this soon, and that must mean a couple of things. For one, that they were not selling them at a profit. We talked about the Chevy Bolt a lot on our EV podcast as the example of how cheap an electric vehicle could get. You know, the 2023 models for a while were sitting at like $26,000 before the federal tax credit. So you're talking about an EV with over 250 miles of range that technically started under $20,000 for a while there. Again, with really the only compromise that it's capped at 50 kilowatts, which is not ideal, but for a lot of people just commuting to work and back, that is an incredible bargain. But a lot of the times, especially with legacy auto, like we've seen with Ford, if it sounds like a pretty good deal, it's probably because the company is losing a ton of money on it. And similar to Ford's situation with the Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning, if you're losing a ton of money on those vehicles, you're not encouraged to ramp up production or availability on them too much, or even cut prices on them when demand gets worse, because you're already losing thousands and thousands of dollars on them. So while GM didn't explicitly disclose how much money they were losing on the Chevy Bolt, I feel like if they were making a profit on it, they probably would keep it around. If your main concern is just that, oh, well, it doesn't have the Ultium battery pack or it's capped at 50 kilowatts, I would just say, why can't we just make a Bolt that supports at least maybe 150 kilowatts like the ID4 does? Or maybe we could fit the Ultium battery pack in a Chevy Bolt, but I guess they weren't interested in doing that, likely because the fundamental way the Chevy Bolt was designed, I'm guessing there wasn't like an easy or simple way to just update it to suddenly have faster charging speeds or the Ultium battery pack. The way GM is pushing it is that they're more focused on ramping production of the Equinox and the Blazer and the Lyriq and the Silverado EV and the Sierra. Way too many models in my opinion. There's a lot of overlap between a lot of these SUVs, but what do all of those other electric vehicles that GM wants to make have in common? They all cost more. So to me, the fact that the Blazer and the Equinox and everything is more expensive than the Bolt was is an indication that the reason they're straight up canceling it isn't because of some kind of battery or cabling limitation. It's because they were losing too much money on it. So hopefully with the Ultium platform, they can achieve a bit better profitability than what they were getting with the Bolt. But honestly, that's still really hard for me to believe, because GM in a statement recently claimed that the Silverado EV, they expect to qualify for the full $7,500 tax credit, which is basically a wink way of saying that the Silverado is going to be under $80,000. And if it's gonna still have their targeted 400-mile range, that's gonna need probably in the ballpark of 180 to 200 kilowatt hours. And I'm sorry, there's just no way you can put a battery pack in a vehicle that big and charge $80,000 for it and have it turn a profit. Maybe if you're Tesla, you can figure that out, but that's because you have your own in-house cell manufacturing and you skip out on a paint shop and you have a structural battery pack and an exoskeleton and basically no buttons on the interior. Maybe a company like that could figure out how to turn a profit with a 400-mile EV at $80,000, but GM, with their complex interiors and the complicated paint, the lack of structural battery pack or exoskeleton, yeah, no, I'm sorry, they're gonna have to charge well over $100,000 for that thing to be profitable. And if they're targeting the tax credit, I don't think it will be. So my general, annoyance with General Motors is it feels like everything they do in regards to the EV world is all about PR. None of it's actually about being practical. Like, they advertised the crap out of the Lyriq and were trying to boast about how great the Lyriq was, and you had YouTubers saying, is this a Model Y killer? But then they limited the production of it so much, they didn't make very many of them. But at the same time, we're trying to ramp production of the Hummer EV, which is the least efficient electric vehicle of all time, with this ginormous 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. And because of all the Bolt fires and stuff, that was pretty much the only EV they had for a while, and they only delivered 2 of them last quarter. So they get along really well with the Biden administration, and he's quoted, of course, for saying, "Congratulations, Mary, you led." Like, you're leading this EV transition despite delivering less than a tenth as many EVs as Tesla does. But they created a bunch of negative press about electric vehicles with the Chevy Bolt, and also a bunch of negative inefficiency claims when it comes to the Hummer EV, leading into the idea that electric vehicles are too heavy, too expensive, and consume too many raw earth materials. That argument holds up really well if you're talking about the Hummer, holds up less well when you talk about the majority of electric vehicles, which are Teslas, both the Model Y and Model 3 being far more efficient, and it feels like Tesla is actually prioritizing scaling up production to meet demand, whereas GM was just more focused on what can we do that makes us look like we care about EVs. Let's buy all the Super Bowl ads, let's get Will Ferrell driving around our Cadillac, and try to convince people that we care about electric vehicles without actually having to make and deliver that many good ones. I'm hoping that's changing with the ramp up of their next generation electric vehicle platform, but yeah, it's just, I guess, kind of the end of the era for the Chevy Bolt. Rest in flames. Peace. What do you guys think? Are you gonna miss the Chevy Bolt? Are there any Bolt owners out there watching this that are upset? It will probably be refreshing, though, to avoid all of the confusion that I still run into on a daily basis. Some people call it the Volt, which they don't make anymore. Arguably, the Volt was probably more beloved because it was a plug-in hybrid, and then they made the Bolt, which confused people because the naming was so similar, but it was all electric. Now we can just do away with all those Bolt-Volt naming schemes, and that should help simplify GM's electric vehicles, right? Right? All that good stuff. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. Have an excellent rest of your day.